Well, we're joined as we are every week by our friend Simon Kent, the managing editor of Breitbart London. Hey, Simon, great to see you again.
Great to see you too, Ezra.
There's a lot going on in Europe that is of interest to Canadians. There is a massive movement of, they call them migrants. In the U.S., they'd probably be called illegal immigrants. People flooding across the Mediterranean mainly, but also coming from Eastern Europe. Tell me about this mass migration that's going on. Who are these people and what are they after?
Well, it's interesting. This has been called the biggest single mass migration of people in Europe since 1945, since the end of the Second World War. And at the moment, Europe is seeing a flood of people coming across the Mediterranean from North Africa, from sub-Saharan Africa. And they're getting out of places like Libya, they're getting out of Syria, they're getting out of, basically bailing out of North Africa and trying to come across and start a new life across here on the continent or in mainland Europe. And the trouble is they're landing in Italy and in Greece, but they're not stopping there, Ezra. They're starting to move, and this movement of people is spreading right across Europe. And they're heading for Germany, they're heading for Sweden, and as we've seen so often, they're heading to Calais because they want to come to the United Kingdom.
And that's where the channel, the underground, the underwater tunnel, the rail tunnel from the UK is. So do they literally walk or drive through the channel? How do they get from Calais to the United Kingdom? Do they have access to the tunnel, or do they just hop on trains and trucks?
Well, at the moment they're hopping on trucks. Sometimes there's professional smuggling gangs, people smugglers, who will go to the camps outside Calais and even up towards Dunkirk, further up the coast, and they pay these people smugglers to get them across the channel, and they'll hide them in the back of cars, and sometimes these people will hide in trucks. The whole idea for them is to get to the United Kingdom. The same reason they want to get to Germany is because they feel like then they can tap into a welfare system that will look after them, and yes, it's going to be much better than where they left behind. The argument, though, in a lot of European countries now, more and more, how sustainable is this? How long can Europe afford, physically and in so many other ways, afford to take this flow of migrants before things start to stretch? And you will see stretch, you will see social problems in parts of Europe, in cities in Germany and in parts of France. Goodness knows we've seen some terrible things happen in France recently because of this influx of people, this ability to move with never being stopped, with never having to present a passport, with never crossing a frontier, because really there are no frontiers anymore in Europe. It's open to anyone that arrives.
Yeah, I mean, it was 20 years ago that the European Union decided to basically take down border posts, and I get it. I mean, a Frenchman and a German from Germany, the idea of them crossing the border and doing business, integrating economies made a lot of sense, but I think what's happening is anyone who manages to get on a dinghy and land in Spain or Greece, now they get access to this Schengen area, as it's called. So, I mean, let me just give the example from last week when you had that terrorist from Morocco who was stopped before he could slaughter that train from Amsterdam to Paris. He managed to get from Morocco just across the Mediterranean to Spain, and from there he could go anywhere. So it's almost as if you can touch the ground, you're home free, and you can move without being checked. That was not contemplated 20 years ago when this was really an economic move, a cutting red tape move. I love the idea of cutting red tape. I wouldn't want to have to go to a border kiosk to go from Alberta to BC to Ontario, but these are foreigners coming in, and then they take advantage of this open borders, aren't they?
Well, that's right. If you talk about the federated states of Europe now, it's a wonderful ideal to be able to travel freely, do business, and go about your daily work without being encumbered by borders. On the other side of things, though, because there's no borders, people can move through such a porous environment. This guy that got on the train from Morocco, he'd never been challenged, he'd never been asked to produce a passport, he'd never been stopped. No one ever asked him why he was going about his business. And I'm not for a surveillance society in the slightest. But you also have to balance the right for people not to have to face what those people faced on that train last Friday. He's a terrorist. And he said he found the rifle, the AK-47, in a bush inside a backpack, and he was going to rob the train. Well, if you believe that, you'll believe anything, because he had a dozen lots of ammunition with him, plus the handgun, plus the bolt cutter. He was out to cause bloody mayhem. And the people on that train were very, very lucky indeed that those that airmen and those US soldiers and that the Brit and we think a Frenchman were there to stop it. But this is an example of where open borders can go wrong. This is a balance Europe is going to have to strike very soon, because the sheer pressure, the sheer weight of numbers coming across the Mediterranean does not look like stopping soon, Ezra, and it's going to keep on going through this summer and into next year.
Last question for you. I can understand a poor person in North Africa wanting free stuff in Europe. I can understand anyone from Syria or Somalia wanting to get the hell out of those war-torn places. So on the one hand, I mean, it's human nature to want to better yourselves, and if Europe is giving away free stuff, why not take it? But how much of this is what the Islamic State promised last year they would do? They said, we are coming for Europe. They had this big murder ceremony on the coast where they murdered a bunch of Coptic Christians for their blood to flow across the Mediterranean to Christian Rome, the heart of the Vatican. Like, it was a very symbolic declaration of war. You've got Islamic State terrorists in Egypt, more so in Libya. They're saying we're coming for Europe. So amongst every 100 economic migrants, how many are people like this Moroccan terrorist who are embedded and who plan to wage jihad? Do we have any intelligence estimates on how many of these economic migrants also mean to do war?
We do, Ezra. That's a very good question. Just today, the Spanish authorities said they think that there could be 800 people who have come across from North Africa with no other intention than to cause terror. They're jihadis, and the Spanish are saying that they think there's 800. If the authorities are saying that, goodness knows how many they are, because they're probably not being entirely truthful with us on the grounds they don't want people to panic. But the thing is, they don't know, Ezra. They can't answer that question. And until they can answer that question accurately, how many of these people are coming across from North Africa with no other cause and intent in mind than to creating jihad on the continent and here in the UK. There's a huge security issue, and there's this huge security problem that no one has an answer to yet. No one knows what to do other than to throw their hands in the air, up in the air, and walk away. That to me is not a solution.
Yeah. Simon Kent, great to talk to you as always. We'll see you next week, my friend.